Hi, guys, and welcome back to Your Inner Spark. I'm Lana, and on this podcast, we dive into all of the beautiful and messy components of this human experience. I'm so excited for today's episode because I get to interview one of my really, really good friends. So, welcome, Nikki. Thank you for joining us in this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Nikki and I have an important topic we want to dive into today, and it's a conversation that I've really been wanting to have for some time now. I just haven't felt ready, or it hasn't been top of mind. But Nikki and I met almost 2 years ago, and it's a really funny story. I'm going to share my perspective, and then Nikki, you can add to it. So, a little over 2 years ago, we both get invited out by a mutual girlfriend to a girls' night. That's where we meet for the first time, and we're having some wine. We go to a wine tasting, we go out to dinner, the drinks are flowing. And I'm looking at Nikki, I'm like, this girl is an absolute bombshell. And she's telling me about how her boyfriend is so amazing and he's so great and he's so hot and how they're going to get engaged really soon. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this girl has it all together. And I, at that point in time, had been in a relationship for over 4 years. And I'm saying the same thing too. I'm like, I think we're going to engage within at least a year. So we meet and we both are in this spot where we're like, oh, I think we're going to get engaged to the men that we're dating. And literally, it was like 2 or 3 weeks later, Nikki went through a breakup. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, that came out of left field. And I'll let Nikki share her breakup story here in a minute. But I just remember being like, oh my gosh, that came out of left field. And then it was like a week later after Nikki went through her breakup that I found out my partner was being accused of assaulting a 21-year-old female. So we both became single within like a week of each other, within a month of actually meeting. And we were both in our 20s with dogs, starting over from scratch. And so we really, really bonded and connected. But the reason why I think our stories are so important to share is both of those relationships we were exiting were with men that were significantly older than us, that we both started dating when we were very, very young. And as we've both healed over the last almost 2 years, we've done a lot of self-examination and reflection, and we've really started to understand how harmful those relationships were to us because I think of those power dynamics that came with dating men that were much older than us. So the topic we want to talk about today is how dangerous those age gap relationships can be, especially for women, I would say 25 and under. So, Nikki, tell everybody your perception of like that first meeting and kind of like how everything transpired from there.
Oh my gosh, I completely forgot we even went to that winery. But it was fun. That was when we both were drinking at the time because as you guys know, Lana's sober. I am also sober. So that's we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But
Healing.
yeah, exactly. Um, so that was like I had a blast that night. We were just out at this like really fancy I want to say cocktail place,
Yeah.
right? And I remember we were sitting in this booth and we were ordering all these drinks and stuff. And we were sitting there talking, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get engaged. I was supposed to be getting engaged in February, but that just didn't happen. And like, behind the scenes, there was obviously a reason why that didn't happen, and I'll get into that as well. But I just remember we hit it off like immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And there was other women that were there too, but I think you and I really connected because we were kind of we were close to the same age, and we are in the
Mm-hmm.
same life path. We were being housewives without the ring, and we're gonna talk
Yes.
about that a little bit more.
Yes.
um you were living out in the country. We had just bought a house in the suburbs. I was new to Vancouver, so I didn't really know anyone. And also at that time, I didn't have a lot of friends. So I was really excited to be hanging out with a bunch of girls that were close to my age, and I thought we were having a blast. But, you know, 2 weeks later, my ex partner comes home from a business trip. And when he was on that business trip, I had like this overwhelming sense of, oh my God, he's going to break up with me, which was like, we never had a good relationship. It was never stable whatsoever. But for some reason, that moment, it was like, okay, this is going to happen. And I can't really explain why I felt that way. I think it was mostly because he wasn't really like paying attention to me as much as he would normally be on these business trips. But I was also ironically watching The Ultimatum, which is about, if you guys have seen the Netflix show, it's about these couples who really want to get, one of them wants to get engaged and get married, and the other one's just very hesitant. It's a really honestly toxic reality TV show, but we like to
Aren't
indulge
they
in
all?
stuff like that. Yeah. And I just remember like really relating to one of the girls on the show. And I just that night, the night before he came home, had this gut feeling like he's going to come home and break up with me. So that whole entire day, I was sick to my stomach. I didn't eat. And I picked him up from the airport, and I was planning us a trip to Costa Rica, him and I, because we were getting ready to celebrate our 3 years together. We were together like almost 4 years, but we were in a relationship for three. And I remember just like him getting in the car and everything seemed fine. He's like, "Oh, I missed you so much. And I can't wait to, get home and get some food and all this stuff." And I was telling him about like booking this trip for our 3 years. And he got kind of quiet and whatever. And he was like really cranky because he had just been on a long flight and he was hungry. So I was like, "Okay, well, what do you want to eat?" And he's like, "I don't even care. Just take me somewhere." And I was like, in this relationship, let me just say, I kind of knew when to shut up and when to talk. And I'm the type of I'm an extrovert. I love to talk, but I knew that in that moment I needed to shut up and just go and get us food. So I took us to Chick-fil-A, and I will never forget this moment. It was raining outside. Um it's really rainy day in April, and I was in the drive-through, and he told me like, oh, I was trying to have a conversation with him. I remember that. And he just told me, "Can we just be quiet until we get food in my system?" And I was like, "Oh God." And that feeling just started. I felt like I was going to throw up. So I'm like, "Are you going to break up with me?" And he goes, "Nikki, I don't want to talk about that right now." And I was like joking with him, and we pull up into the drive-through, and I'm like, "Well, just say you're not going to." And he turns to me and he goes, "Well, that's not true." And I start sobbing because my entire life was entangled in this man. My finances were tied up with this man. We had 3 animals together. I was in a completely different state, 45 minutes plus with no traffic away from my family. I was isolated from my friends. Nobody knew anything about this relationship. And I felt like my whole world was falling apart. And by the way, we were not engaged. We didn't have a kid or anything like that
Yeah.
together. um
Engagement didn't happen.
Yeah, thank God.
Yeah.
And so we're ordering the food, and I'm crying, and it's embarrassing because I'm the driver. I'm the one like trying to talk to the people. So I ordered the food, and I am like, "Well, can we talk about it? Like, I don't know what to do." And he's like, "I don't want to talk about this right now." And so I sat in that parking lot and just like cried and lost all my self-respect and was begging him to stay with me because I didn't know what to do. But this happened a lot in our relationship. He would constantly be like, "We need to break up." Or it was me saying, "We need to break up," like every single fight. So I thought it was just another one of those things that we were going through again. And I was begging him, like, "Please, I don't have anything." Like, and he knew that. He knew that him leaving me was going to leave me in disarray and all that stuff. So we I cried in the car, and he yelled at me in the car, and then finally I was able to like stop myself from being hysterical and drive us home. And when we got home, we just had a complete blowout fight. But that was basically like the start of the breakup, and I can get into more later on, leaving that, but it was just it was like one of the worst days of my life, I thought.
Yeah, and I think something you said going back, like that really hit home for me was you saying, "Oh, I loved being out at the girls' night and connecting with these other women because I didn't have that many friends." And I think
Mhm.
that's something that we've really reflected on and really drawn awareness to is how isolating it is to date older men when you're in your early 20s. So, backtracking really quick, how old were you when you met your ex and how old was he? Like what was the age gap?
I was freshly 20. No, I was 20 when I met him, and when we broke up, I was 24. I'm 25 now. I'll be 26 next month, but I was relatively young. And just to give a little background on where I was, like, mentally, um, I was kicked out of my parents when I was 18 years old. Did not I was not a very good kid, I'll be honest. I went to jail. Started messing with the wrong crowd. Was addicted to Xanax, so I did not have like a good path. And honestly, my choices were terrible. So I was not in a good headspace to be dating people. And I've dated people in the past that were decent partners, but I would say my track record was not good. And also, unfortunately, at the time, trigger warning, I'm going to talk about sexual assault. I was sexually assaulted at 19. And so I had nothing. I had no self respect. I was working in sex work as a bikini barista and just like trying to get by, like really trying to scrape by. And this man had saw me at one of my jobs. I was working two jobs. I was a waitress and a bikini barista, and he sought me out. I didn't know who he was. I didn't even see him at all, and he used to tell this story about how he saw me at work and it was like love at first sight, and he tried to get in my way, but I did this server thing where I turned the other way and I didn't see him. And so he reached out to one of my coworkers and he was like, um who is this girl? So he stalked me on the Instagram like normal people do, right? And he tried to go to my work again and I wasn't there, and he showed up another time and I wasn't there. And so finally he reached out to me on Instagram, and like I said, I had no self-respect at the time, and I was kind of, dating around, and I was like, "Oh, this guy he looks like he has a lot of money." He was driving like these nice cars and stuff. He looked like very established. And like, I wasn't dating guys necessarily for money, but that's definitely a perk. He had some things on his Instagram that were flashy and I was interested. And so I went out on a date with him and I thought we got along super well. I remember sitting in he had a Z06 Corvette, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. It had red interior, and I'm a car girl, so I was like, "Oh, this is so dope." And I was bragging to him about how I had just bought my Subaru that was a 2018, and that was the year that we had met. And I was like, "What year is your car?" And he goes, "Oh, it's a 2019." And I was like, "Oh, so this guy's like there out there." And so we went on a date, we hit it off, and we started seeing each other every single day, um, just consistently. And then we kind of got into this like dynamic of like, we're seeing each other, but we're not. We're seeing each other, but we're not. And I remember within the first week, I had a trip to Los Angeles because I was going to a concert, and I had this really weird gut feeling the night before because he was supposed to take me to the airport, and I had this gut feeling throughout the day like, ugh, something seems off about this guy. And he texts me and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't take you tomorrow, but I hope you have a really good trip." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, whatever." I end up going on my flight and I have a layover in San Jose, I believe, or some weird random spot. And I unlock my phone and he sends me this long text message about how he's still in love with his ex girlfriend and that he thinks that we should stop seeing each other. And I was shocked and I was like, okay, whatever. Back then, I had a little bit more of a backbone, but there was something about this guy that was like very magnetic. And I was like, why doesn't he want me? Like, normally I was able to just drop guys and it was whatever. But for some reason, this specific guy, like, really sunk his teeth in to me, like, even right from that very beginning stage. And so I remember, like, throughout the trip, like, I would text him a couple of things here and there just to see if he would respond, and then on my last day, he's like, "I miss you, I fucked up, like, I need to go and see you." And so from there, he, like, comes over to my apartment the day that I get back, and he apologizes, and he's like, "Oh, I still wanna see you," and then that's kind of how this, like, addiction to this man became, like, into what was a disaster of a relationship.
Yeah, so explain a little bit how it transpired from like you guys dating to how things were when you guys broke up, where you're living in his home, you're working for his company, how
Mhm.
intertwined things, just what's that timeline look like of events to get you from meeting this man, he's magnetic, you're very into him, to your whole world being intertwined with him? Because then we can kind of backtrack and peel apart the different layers, because there's so many things you're talking about. I'm like, I want to talk about this and I want to dive into all these different topics, but I think it's important to kind of explain a little bit further how that relationship developed.
Mhm. You know, I think the reason we, like, right off the bat, I think created a trauma bond because that night that he came over to my apartment and apologized, he told me some of his deepest secrets. Actually, no, let me backtrack. Our second date, he drops a bomb on me, which I'm not gonna say, obviously, to, like, kind of conceal his identity. Um, but he drops a bomb on me, something that's like very personal to him and people have their opinions about, which could be a make or break thing. In me, being the type of person that's like really accepting of other people, I saw right past it and I was like, well, I've gone through things too. And I told him that, and I had never talked to anyone about this at the time because I'd just come to terms with it about my sexual assault. And so immediately we created this trauma bond. So we didn't start dating until almost a year into our relationship. And that was because he would hide the fact that he was seeing other women from me and we weren't in a relationship. So that was completely fine, but he thought that I would flip out. That was his words. That I would flip out if he told me the truth. But I still ended up finding out about all these women. It was his ex-girlfriend, girls on dating apps, like girls he was working with, like all these things. And I also found out that his ex was also working for him at the time. So while he's seeing me, every day he's going to his office and he's seeing this other woman, which is like, I don't know. It bothered me knowing that that was a thing. So I was constantly like ask him like how long he's gonna have her as an employee. And sorry, I'm like getting kind of like anxious about it.
Well, we can like
Just
move past the little details and more just like dive into like, how it like just those last few years, how life became so intertwined. You know what I mean? And then we
mhm,
can kind of pick apart the different topics. So you don't like, if it's making you anxious, we don't need to dive into like all the little details,
mhm,
but more just like big picture. Like, how did your life go from you're working as a bikini barista, you're working as a waitress, you meet this man who's older than you, more established, much more
mhm,
successful. Clearly, he's got some stuff to work through, as we both do because we're young, to now being in this position where like when you break up, you don't have a leg to stand on. How does that transpire? Because I'll also kind of explain my story. And I think a lot of people, if you've dated older men in your younger years, you can kind of relate to how it goes from, they come in, they swoop you up, they're there to help you. And next thing you know, you're dependent on them.
mhm.
So,
Well,
not trying to make you anxious at all. We don't have to go into like the little details, you
oh, no,
know?
you're fine. It's that because I still, like, kind of feel like it's a thing that I'm processing. I'm, like, over it now. Like, I don't get hysterical, but I still, like, get anxious because I feel like, in a weird way, there's still some control. Like, if I talk about these things, I do not he's not going to. Like, he has no control over me whatsoever, but I still sometimes, like, feel that way, but
No, and I
so
get it, 'cause I know you've received messages even, like, within the last 6 months, to
yeah.
be like, "Stop talking," so I totally get that.
Yeah, so, oh, also, I need to touch on this. I was getting my real estate license, and, I'm not gonna say what he did for work, but let's just say he worked pretty closely with someone who is in that industry. And, I remember I was getting my license because I was like, "I wanna be something, like, I don't wanna be in sex work anymore, I don't wanna be working as a waitress anymore," and so I quit being a bikini barista. I was working as a waitress full-time, I believe I was doing Instacart, like, doing anything that I could to make money that wasn't involving my body. Nothing against that, by the way, if people enjoy that line of work, it helped me get somewhere. Um, and so he was like giving me advice and all this stuff, and he would always like make comments about like where I lived because I lived in a low income property at that time. And he would always say, like, "Oh, you could do so much better, and you should go and move into Portland." And at the time, he had just bought a place in Portland. And he's like, "Oh, you should move somewhere close by." And so I started apartment hunting and I found an apartment that was really far away from my family, and it was like in not a very good area. And I got into that apartment and I stayed there for a month, and I remember him telling me, "Well, why don't you just break your lease and move in?" And we were out getting drinks at, like, some bar, and he's like, "Well, why don't you just move in with me? We'll save money together." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." So, we, move in together in January of 2020, and then we go to, Cabo, Mexico for my 22nd birthday. So this all transpired from when I was 20, 21 to 22, and that's really when the, I guess, abuse started, was when I moved in. Like, we would fight back then, but it was never to the extent that it was when I started living with him. So the pandemic happened. We were living in a super, super tiny condo, and there was no distance for us. We were both working from home. I had just gotten my real estate license, and I was getting ready to close my first deal, and it was just a disaster. We would fight almost every day. And I remember being in situations where I'm like, the neighbors have to be hearing us, you know? And also at the time, we were so codependent. We did everything together. We were going grocery shopping together. We were going to the gym together. And slowly, one by one, every single one of my friends dropped off because he would tell me that he didn't like to hang around them because when they would come over, they would annoy him, and he would say they were losers, and he would just basically put that little worm in my ear or plant the seed. And eventually I had practically no friends. I barely saw my family, and yeah, that's just kind of how it all transpired.
Yeah, and then eventually you started working for his company, right? Doing, like, social media management when you had your social media management
Mhm.
company, so then your work became intertwined, right? Like, it
Yeah.
just became, like, more and more, yeah,
Mhm.
connection between everything you guys had going on.
So at the time, I had quit both of my jobs to pursue my career in real estate, and it was really slow. People advised against me quitting my jobs because, your first year of real estate, there's no guarantee that you'll even close one deal. But I remember just being like, I'm not making any money. I still have like a car payment and like other bills outside of rent. Like, I'm paying this guy rent on his mortgage. I still need to make up for that on my part. And so I remember being like, I don't know what to do. And he's like, "Well, maybe we could pay you to work on our social media. You do so well on social media." And at the time, I had kind of gone viral on TikTok. And he was like, "Well, why don't you just help us out with a couple of things? So we started off with like, I think $500 a week. They were paying me like $1,000 a month, and that just barely covered, some of the bills. And so we decided that we were going to sell that place because at the time living in Portland was not the safest. I had gotten into situations where um excuse me. Um there was just like sketchy situations that happened to the both of us and we didn't feel safe there. So we decided that we were going to move out to where his business was, which was in another state. And for the time being, we were going to move on to his parents' property to save money. His dad he graciously let us live on the property for free. And so we were stockpiling money. Um, I was trying to do work. He was trying to do work. His business was taking off. My business was kind of taking off, but it was still a slow start and I wasn't making enough money. So he talked to his business partner and he was like, why don't we just hire her on full time? So that's when I started working for him and they were paying me enough to where I could um, afford every single thing that I needed. I was not like, I was living really good, honestly. And also at that time, we were, building our house in that other state. And he had told me I was driving a Subaru Crosstrek and I was like, I think less than $8,000 away from paying it off completely. And I was really proud of myself because that was the first car that I ever had that I bought. It was my only car that I ever had. And so I was really proud that I actually had a car of my own and I paid for it myself. And he was like, well, I don't think it's a very good idea for you to be pulling up to our house with the Subaru. Don't you think? Like, we have all these other cars that are really fancy. Don't you want to buy a car that makes you feel good? And at the time, I really wanted a Porsche Macan, but I never thought at that time, especially, that I would be able to afford something like that. But at the time, the car market was kind of at a weird angle. And he was just like, well, why don't we just go and look at the cars just to see? And we went to the dealership. I saw a car that I really loved. And I was like, I really like this car, but, I don't know if I can afford the payments. And I don't even know if I really want to buy that car right now because I'd be saving so much money with the Subaru. And so he convinced me that I should go and buy the car. And the way he convinced me was by saying I'd feel so much better pulling up to houses with this awesome car. People would want to work with me because I had this beautiful, fancy car. I would be this magnetic person because of this car, and that he would pay for the insurance on it. And all I would have to pay for was my uh, car payment. And so the car payment was about like $300 more than what my initial car payment was with my Subaru, but the interest rate was pretty decent and we got it for a decent price. So I unfortunately lost a lot of money trading in my car for this Porsche Macan, all because he wanted me to look a certain way. And don't get me wrong, like I really like that car, but the main reason why I got that car was because that's what he wanted me to have.
Yeah, because what happens is they see these young women that are in these more vulnerable situations, right? Like we haven't established ourselves yet. We're
Mhm.
still figuring out who we are. Most of us are still fresh, just a couple years out of high school, if not right out of high school, and very few people have everything figured out right out of high school, and especially if you have an upbringing like you and I have had where we don't have financial support or any thing to lean on, right? Like we're having to support ourselves and really just pull ourselves up out of these situations where we weren't handed anything. And then they try and mold us and shape us into the person that they want us to be. So like when you're explaining the story, it's like, okay, he saw you working as a waitress. He knew you worked as a bikini barista. He obviously knew that you were in a more vulnerable situation. And it's nothing against you. A lot of us are vulnerable at that age because we haven't figured out who we are at all. And most of us haven't taken the time to unpack the experiences that we've had at that point in our life so far. So A lot of us are still operating from a lot of wounds. A lot of us are still operating from very like behavior patterns we've had since childhood. And for him to, on the second date, overshare in a way with the hopes that then you are going to overshare with him in return and kind of form that bond. I mean, it's just like you see the pattern and then you guys move in together. Once you move in together, the abuse starts to escalate. But at the same time, like on the outside looking in, it's like, my life is so beautiful. Look at this car that I drive. Look at the house that we're building. Look at this life that we have. It's so beautiful. But behind closed doors, nothing is good. Nothing is great. And they know that. They know that they have the upper hand. They know that they have the power. So when they go to break up with us or break up with you, it's like they know what situation they're putting you in. And so remind me of the age gap though, because I don't think it's nearly as big as the age gaps that I've experienced, but I do know that like it was profound when it came to like where you were at in life with, at the time that you guys started dating.
So he was 25, turning 26, and I was 20. So it was about a 6-year age gap.
Okay. So there's a few things I want to dive into, but I want to kind of share my backstory because I'm not sure if everybody here knows my backstory when it comes to age gaps in relationships. So at 19 years old, I was in a very, very vulnerable state. It was the same year that I contracted herpes. Obviously was not feeling good about myself in any way, shape, or form. A couple years after, trigger warning, also being sexually assaulted myself and not talking about it with anybody ever in my entire life. So I already was feeling a lot of shame about myself. I was already feeling that I wasn't desirable, that I wasn't worthy, that nobody was going to want me. And then I got herpes, right? So it was the nail in the coffin for me at that point in my life. And I was 19 years old and I worked for like 2 months at this tanning salon. Okay. I sucked at it because they wanted us to sell like 50 million lotions a day. And I couldn't do it because I was like, this is a scam. And I met this man who tanned there and he was 31 years old. And I remember the day that I realized he was pursuing me, just being like, what? Oh, and he was very well established. And I was in no way looking at him and thinking money in my conscious brain. I wasn't like, oh, I'm attracted to this man because he has money. But in my subconscious brain, in my body, where I was struggling to make ends meet, I, had lived in financial insecurity for my entire life. I looked at him and I saw stability and security. So it wasn't this conscious thought pattern where I was like, oh, I'm into this man because he has money, because that wasn't really anything. I didn't know. I still don't know anything about cars. I've never really been into the finer things in life. I just, was seeking stability and security. And it wasn't a conscious thought pattern where I was like, oh, I'm going to date this man for stability and security. But when I look back, that's what I was seeking. And obviously, I also was in a position of not operating from a place of high self-esteem. I was not making high value decisions for myself. And so when he pursued me, I never once even examined if I liked him. I just was like, okay, this is security, sign me up. And I entered that relationship. So it was 11 years. It was an 11-year age gap. I moved into his home and, similarly to you, like I still paid him rent. It wasn't like he was providing for me financially in any way, shape, or form. He never gave me a dime. He didn't pay my bills. He didn't pay my rent. I still paid for all of my stuff. I just was paying him rent instead of paying rent elsewhere. And it's kind of a similar situation happened too with moving in so quickly. Was I was living in another house with 2 roommates and it was like a sketchy party house kind of thing. Like one of my roommates decided he was going to be a nudist. And so it was just like, there was a lot going on. And I remember him just being like, he didn't really want to hang out there. He was above that. And so he's like, well, why don't you just move in and you can pay me what you're paying him? And I think it was like $500. Like it wasn't like I was moving in and paying half the mortgage at that point, but I was paying the same amount of rent I was paying elsewhere where I had a room, I had shelter, And so I moved on in and so like very quickly too. I think he started pursuing me in October and within 6 months he was like, yeah, why don't you just move in? And again, at the same time, or same as you, I was like, this is a great idea because now I'm not going back and forth because I was the one going back and forth with staying overnight and everything like that. Anyways, so you move in, right? So there's a 11-year age gap and, yeah, just pretty, it happens so fast. I don't think we even realize how quickly your lives become intertwined with theirs, right? And how all of a sudden you're kind of dependent on them in ways that you never anticipated you would be. And you step into their world. I think that's one of the most I think it's one of the most dangerous components of dating somebody who's significantly older when you are not established yet, is you step into their world. They don't step into yours. A 31-year-old, he doesn't want to come hang out with my friends who are 19. He thinks they're immature. And they put these little seeds in your ear of like, oh, well, I don't think this person is good for you or whatever. And you are aware that this is taking place, to be very clear. You're like, oh, well, I trust this person's input. I see that they are much more mature than me. And so what they're saying is probably right. And it becomes a very, very isolating experience. And to add to that, how many of your friends want to come hang out with your ancient boyfriend, right? So it's kind of a two-way street where friends kind of die off. They kind of fall off. And you become extremely isolated, which makes you even more dependent on this person emotionally, mentally, and it makes it really hard to leave those scenarios. So that relationship was extremely unhealthy for me and extremely damaging for me, because there was, yeah, he similarly, I mean, not exactly like your scenario, but he put me down constantly. And it was like, I internalized it. I believed what he said to be fact. So when he would say, like, if he would make comments about my physical body, or if he would cheat on me multiple times, I caught him cheating on me. And it was always because I wasn't enough in X, Y, and Z category. I didn't ever view it as like, oh, you're a piece of shit. I was like, oh, I am not enough. That must be true. That must be fact. I just need to be more of this or change this about myself to gain his acceptance. Because at that point, his acceptance and his approval became very important to me because I was so dependent on him. So that was a relationship that damaged me deeply. And then I got out of that relationship, and less than a year later, your kitty.
Yeah.
Less than a year later, I entered another age gap relationship where somebody at work groomed me. He had been grooming me throughout that whole, even when I was in that prior relationship, the groundwork was being laid. He groomed me, and I was barely 22 when we first met, and he was 36, and I signed up for a second one. And I think that second relationship was even more damaging to me because I hated myself more for repeating the cycle, But when we met, I was at the tail end of that second age gap relationship. So I had spent almost all of my 20s at that point. I think I was 27. Yeah. I was 27 years old, and I didn't have very many female friends because both of these men, I had stepped into their world. I became friends with their friends, but some of their friends were like 40, 50 years old. I'm not even kidding you. And I was, I was in my 20s. So when we met, it was like, I was so stoked because I was like, oh, somebody in my 20s who is living somewhat of a similar lifestyle to me. And yeah, then obviously, so it was like we're both in these positions where we are still, even though we're in our 20s and our lives look beautiful from the outside looking in, we both were in very vulnerable positions. And I don't even know if we realized how vulnerable it was until like the rugs were pulled out from underneath us.
Yeah, and did you have people around you kind of like start to realize like, hey, something is off about this relationship? Like, were people ever coming up to you and saying, hey, like, he shouldn't be doing this, or like, this seems weird? Or did people make any comments about your guys' relationship?
Yeah, that first relationship, the one where I entered at 19, yeah, I think I got more comments then, but I was like, age is just a number. Like, I felt like when I was entering that relationship with him, I felt like age was just a number. There's nothing you could have said to me that would have deterred me. And I think it's super important to understand that. Like, I bought into it fully. You know what I mean? So then I think by the time I was entering that second one, nobody like made any comments because they'd already learned that like I was going to do things the hard way. But yeah, absolutely. And I think I became embarrassed about it. Like ultimately I was embarrassed about it. Like if I met somebody new, like you, for example, it's like, I don't actually want you to know who I'm dating because he's old as fuck. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a situation that I was proud to be in. So, I mean, although our paths are different, and our relationships look different, and our upbringings were different, I feel like we relate in so many ways to like walking that dangerous path of entering those relationships with older men. And I think something that's super important to talk about, and I'm sorry I'm going on here because I'm like, this topic is something that has been bottled up within me, but both of us, when we met those men, when we looked at them from very vulnerable positions, we were like, we, in some way, whether it was a conscious thought pattern or a subconscious thought pattern, we looked at those relationships and we thought, safety, security, because this person is established and we have been living in such unstable circumstances for so long. We're seeking some stability. That's one of our basic human needs is shelter, security. And if those things have been unstable for a good chunk of our life, we're seeking that basic need. Like, I always remind myself when I look back on that time period, I look back on that version of me with so much love and compassion because I was surviving. My family, we lost our home to foreclosure. I have lived with very unstable housing for most of at least through my high school years and then entering, young adulthood. So we're just trying to meet our basic needs. We're trying to survive. We meet these men, they seem like they're going to be a place of safety and security. And what we don't understand and what we didn't understand is it was an illusion of safety, that we were entering one of the most dangerous situations we could possibly be in. This power dynamic, because they know they have power over us. They know that they can control us and manipulate us because our sense of self is not established yet. So anyway, you guys, that was like a long tangent, but Nikki and I met where we didn't know the backstory yet. We didn't know anything about each other's relationships. When we met in that wine bar and we went out to have cocktails, we're like, yeah, we're going to get engaged. Things are so good. Like, we weren't talking about the nitty gritty because at that point you aren't honest about that stuff. You aren't honest about that stuff with anybody. Hold on. I'm kind of blurry. So even to like my closest friends, it wasn't until after my breakup that I actually became honest about a lot of the circumstances of that relationship, So when we met in the wine bar, we're like, we're good. We're going to get engaged. And then 2 weeks later, both of our lives blow up and we land both of us on our asses. Like, where are we going to live? What are we going to do? We have dogs we're starting over with because we both got dogs with our ex-partners. And that was where the unraveling began for both of us to look back and be like, holy shit.
Yeah.
These men were not places of safety. And I think that's why I want to talk about it so much, because I get why young women are doing this, and I'm not faulting them in any way. I want to start this conversation because it's not like you're extra special when an older man pursues you when you're younger. It's actually a dangerous situation most of the time.
It's not just men that do it as well. I mean, you hear more about like the men doing it and stuff, but I mean, I'm still recovering from that relationship, not just emotionally, financially, repairing relationships as well. I remember to bring it back to the isolation part, I was so isolated from my family. He did not want to come and like hang out with my family or anything. And little did I know, my family didn't like him whatsoever. And there was like, my sister's very good at basically being like, this person sucks, just kind of like me. And I kind of knew that she didn't really like him, but she never voiced it until after the relationship. But one of the things that he would do is weaponize the stuff that I would tell him in confidence, whether it be about my childhood or something like that. And so he used the fact that I started basically becoming an adult at 18. He used that against me. So one of the things that he would say to me was stuff like, oh, well, you don't even have a good relationship with your family. What makes you think you're worthy enough to... Why should people like you? Like, why do you think you can't get along with everyone? It's because you're messed up. He would say stuff about me. I've been called every name in the book by this person. I remember at one point in the relationship, I was laying in bed and I was like, I don't know what to do. And trigger warning for this as well. I remember laying in bed and I was like, the only way I will ever get out of this relationship is if he finally kills me. And that's how it felt. I felt trapped. Super
Well,
trapped.
yeah, I mean, it is. Thank you for sharing, first of all. But yeah, it is. You do feel trapped. You feel extremely stuck. And I never experienced violence in that capacity by any means, but like the emotional warfare that I dealt with, it trapped me mentally for sure. It kept me extremely stuck and frozen. And so we both, as we navigated the exiting of both of those partnerships, um, dealt with, and we don't need to dive into the details unless you want to, but like we both dealt with separately these men doing anything in their power that they could to also harm us financially, right?
Mhm.
Oops. So I just think it's been only this last year and a half where I'm like beginning to actually understand the impact that those relationships had on me. Like you said, it's like a big healing process. And I don't want this episode to be like, oh, we're here to bash our ex
Right.
partners, because that's not the intention at all. I more want to start a conversation so that young women that are listening can have insight if in a situation like this presents itself when they're in their early
Mhm.
years. And I will say this, like, I don't like to live in black and white. So I don't think anything is black and white. I don't think this is a statement that I say that there aren't, exceptions to this statement. But when you are like 25 and younger and you haven't established yourself yet, most of us don't know who the fuck we are in our early 20s.
Mhm.
Okay? We just don't yet. We haven't lived enough life experience at that point. If an older man or a much more established human being, and I agree with Nikki, it's not only men, but I tend to find that it's more common that men prey on young women than vice versa. But of course, not everything's black and white.
Mhm.
If somebody is pursuing you, I want you can add to this, but I want you to start to ask yourself, why would somebody who's 30, who's very established, why are they wanting to date me? And I am in no way saying that I don't think that you are a brilliant, beautiful human being who has a lot to offer the world. But why is somebody who's much more established than me wanting to date me? I think it's because they're looking for women that are malleable, women that they can manipulate, women that they can control, so that women that like us, so that we end up in those situations where they know they have the upper hand. We're living in their house and they let us know that all the time, that they're shaping us to be the person that they want us to be. They've isolated us from our friends and our family. We become very, very dependent on them. So I kind of want to shift the conversation now to like how, like, what advice would we give to younger versions of ourselves if we were presented with these opportunities again? You know?
Yeah. Um, One of the first things that I actually just had this conversation with my mom today was like the way that my body would react around him. I thought I had IBS, girl. I had the worst stomach pain, chest pain. I had all these issues to the point where I hired a nutritionist. And I was like, why am I having these issues? I'm working out all the time. I'm gaining all this weight. I look super puffy. I mean, partially because I'm crying all the time. My body felt like I was in a constant fight or flight. And like when you have been through that your entire life, you get used to it. It's like kind of an
Mhm.
addiction as well. But after I left that relationship, oh my God, I had my stomach issues went away. My chest pain went away. All these issues that I thought I had, I'm sorry, it had to do with that relationship, the constant fighting. My cortisol levels were through the roof. That's why I was looking so puffy. That's why I was holding on to so much weight. And there's nothing wrong with, you're beautiful the way that you are. But like, I was so unhealthy because of that relationship, no matter what I did. So that was one of the things.
Oh, that is so powerful. That is so powerful. Pay attention to how you feel in someone's presence. For me, I think I was so deep in survival mode when I met both of these men that I was so out of touch with my body. I had no idea what was going on with my body at any point in time. But I love that. Like, also paid like the nervousness that those like they say now that like butterflies is actually like not a good thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's your nervous system activating. So pay attention to how you feel. That is such a powerful thing. I love that
Mm-hmm.
so much.
Yeah.
I think a big thing too is like how they speak about your friends and your family. Like, are they encouraging you to stay in touch, to maintain connections outside of their world, you know? Because I also experienced that with the first guy I dated where my family didn't like him and he never wanted to go around my family. And so then my family felt uncomfortable around him because they knew he didn't want to be there, and it just created this dynamic where I was like, it's easier just to not go around them.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Archie's emerging from under the bed.
It's okay. Um, that too. I also think that like the way that he talks about other women is a huge, huge thing. Like if they're talking down about their mom, for instance, or their sister, for instance, that is a huge red flag for me.
Yep. And I think it's super, super important, you guys, and I'm all for having a man provide and being open to receiving and all of that, but just make sure you maintain some sort of independence, you know? Make sure if he's helping pay your bills, make sure you're still making some sort of money of your own. Like make sure you have your own thing going on so you aren't in a position at that young of an age to depend on somebody fully. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like if you guys end up having children together or whatnot, you need to make sure that there's something in writing about how you're going to be taken care of if things don't pan out. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the financial stuff? Because I think sometimes there's like a
Yeah.
major misconception that we are dating these older men for money and they are providing money to us in some way, shape, or form. But I would like to just squash those misconceptions because I have found, in my experience anyway, that was never the case.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I was dating him for the money. I definitely like loved him in a way, and well, now that I'm older, I don't think I ever was actually in love with him. I love the idea that I created of him. But
Yeah.
the financial aspect, I was working for his company. He was paying majority of the mortgage. And by the way, that house was supposed to be in my name as well, but last minute that was ripped away from me. And that should have been a sign like, hey, he's not in it for the long haul. I mean, this isn't even freaking working out, you know what I mean? But they will hold that over your head. And I remember when we broke up, there was a lot of things that were said, but there were a couple things that stuck with me. And he told me, he looked me in my face and he said, you will never have this lifestyle because I gave you this lifestyle. And I remember being like, he's kind of right. Like, he was paying me and all that stuff, but like, it was quickly ripped away from me. I mean, by the time that we broke up, within a month, he had fired me from his business. He took me off payroll, and then or they started cutting my pay and then eventually just got rid of me completely. He also gave me 2 weeks to leave the place that I was living with him, and we had a house together. We had everything commingled. We had not one, not two. We had 3 animals together. Which that was another thing too. Uh he got rid of 2 of his dogs right when we started dating, which I mean, I'm a dog person, and knowing what I know now, I would do anything for my dog and my cat. Like, I would make sure that I would just never even think of getting rid of them. No shame to anyone who does it, but I remember when we moved into the barn that he lived in, he was like, "Why don't we get a dog?" And I remember being like, "I don't know if I'm ready for that responsibility, let alone," because he wanted a puppy and, whatever. And so he got me on the idea of getting a puppy. We got the puppy. Who took care of it? Mainly me. And then when we moved into a house towards the end of our relationship, he went and got another dog. And when we broke up, obviously I took the dog that we initially had and my cat, but like that's a huge financial, I don't want to say burden because I don't think they're burdens. They've definitely got me through things, but it's a huge financial thing
Commitment.
to carry.
Yeah.
So
To
that
say,
was like a couple of the financial things, but
yeah. So for me, it was, I mean, I'm in no way saying either that like I met these men and I was like stability, security. And like at the beginning, of course, I felt like there was some draw, you know what I mean? Like I definitely was never in love. Like our experiences are different because I think you actually loved your ex. Like I never had those really romantic feelings towards either of my partners. Um, and I know that's confusing for some people to understand why would I date them? The first one I think was just like there was a lot of excitement, so I think there was a draw. And then the second one, there was like a lot of friendship because we had worked together. So you know what I mean? There was like different reasons. I wasn't like I was just like, oh, I'm like stability and security, and I'm not into these people at all. But I think sometimes there's a misconception that when you're dating somebody older, that there is some kind of financial motive. And well, yeah, I guess at some level there is, right? You're seeking some kind of stability and security, but I want to be crystal clear that I never received a dime from any of the men that I dated. Like they weren't also men that showered me with gifts or anything along those lines. I paid half the rent. I paid all of my own bills. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess in the first one, I didn't pay half the mortgage, but I paid rent. So, anyways, in my last relationship, and I'm not saying this, I'm not putting this out there to just trash his name by any means. I just want you to understand that a lot of times these older men, and this is my experience, actually, I'm just going to say my experience has been that dating older men or older men that pursue young women are a wolf in sheep's clothing. So, this last relationship that I was in, this man really presented himself as being my friend up front. I realize now what grooming is. I didn't think for a long time that grooming could happen to an adult, but I realize now that grooming, can take place anytime there's like a position of power. It could be your boss, it could be your CEO, it could be you know, your college professor or whatever that looks like. But anyways, entered this relationship with this person I entered a relationship with somebody who is very well established financially, had a lot of success in his life. And I started dating him at barely 22 and I was still in college, I was still putting myself through college and I was working 2 jobs. I was working at Red Robin as a waitress at night to make ends meet because I was trying to pay for school and everything and get myself out of credit card debt. And I ended up moving into his home. And initially, when I first moved in with him, I will be honest that when I decided to move in with him initially, it was like I was like, okay, I'll pay half the mortgage because it was about what my apartment rent was at the time. And he was like, no, I want you to only pay X amount, but I want you to like take, the expectation was for me to like kind of take care of like certain household duties. And at the time I was like, okay, that's fine because I'm doing that anyway. That was the worst mistake ever because that will be a whole other topic to get into, the housewife component. But long story, very long. I dated this man for 4.5 years. I spent a majority of those weekends throughout that relationship working on properties that he owned for free. And he might buy me lunch or something that day, but I was completely free labor. It was expected of me to work on his properties on the weekend. It was expected of me. It was a family affair. He owned a bunch of property with his family and they would all work on them on the weekends. And if I didn't want to work on them, I would have to come up with an excuse not to work on them. Even when I was working 2 jobs and in school full time, it was still expected of me to help him with his real estate properties because he was always working on remodels and shit like that. And towards the end of our relationship, within the last year, and besides that, again, he is not paying me. Even when we'd go to dinner, you guys, 50-50. When this man is making exponentially more money than I am, we split things. We went on vacation. We split things 50-50. I was not like, gaining from him financially in any way. Within the last year of our relationship, he did have somebody reach out to him about a rental property that they were going to list. But before they listed, they wanted to see if he knew anybody that was interested. And I did end up purchasing that duplex as my first investment property. And I wouldn't have got that property without him because I would have probably never won in the bidding wars if it had been listed because of the real estate market we were in at that time that I purchased the property. So he knew that he helped me buy a property, but did he give me a dime towards purchasing it? No, it was all my own money. It was just the opportunity came to me because of him. So I do end up remodeling one of the units, which he did help me with. I will give him that. But this is also the tail end of almost 4 years of me working on his properties, like every single weekend. And so think about the fact that moving me in, how much it benefited him. He had somebody to do his laundry. He had somebody to cook for him because it was expected for me to cook dinner every night. He had somebody to clean his house. He had somebody an extra body to work on his properties every weekend. And he wasn't paying me a dime. This wasn't costing him any money financially to move me in. I was still covering, I would buy the groceries. If we went out to dinner, we were splitting things 50-50. So he was benefiting substantially from moving me, this younger woman who was very naive, into his home, right? So at the very end, he helped me buy this property. He helps me remodel it. Cool. It's my property. It's my own thing. And I was grateful for that. I was excited about that. When we break up, shortly after we break up, I move out of the home that we were living in. And I pretty much leave everything behind besides my clothes and my computer equipment. So I don't take anything else. I'm just like, get me out of the hell out of Dodge, right? So this man knows I'm starting over. I didn't have that much cash to my name because I had just purchased and remodeled that property. And it was now had tenants in it. So it wasn't like I could go live in this property. He knew the cash resources I had were very limited. He knew I was starting over from scratch. And he proceeded to, like, in multiple ways, try and screw me over financially. Like, he had found out that he had, like, paid for a couple different items on the property he had helped me remodel. And he sent me an invoice. And for the time he had spent on my property, he sent me an invoice. Well, he owned a property management company, which was still managing my property at that time. And he had authority to sign checks on my behalf. And he signed a check on my behalf for that invoice that he had written to, and cut himself a check off of my operating account for the little bit of work and like the limited supplies he had purchased for my property when I had spent like 4 years helping him financially. Like, if there's any way to say I don't give a fuck about you, that is one of it, right? And then, like, it was just like little things like, yeah, and we don't have to go into all the details because I don't want to feel like I'm here just trying to slander somebody. But the moral of the story is what I learned as I navigated the exiting of that relationship, that I was like, this person never gave a fuck about me as a human being. This person was trying to enhance their own life. This person was wanting a housewife. This person was wanting somebody to cook for them, clean for them, to work for them. And that was it. And I'm not saying everybody's experience with dating older men is going to be this experience that I had, but I think the trap that you need to be careful about walking into is like just basically becoming somebody's housewife, because men know that when they have a woman at home, they can do better in business. They can focus their attention elsewhere. It elevates them to have a woman at home, where the roles are usually reversed for a lot of us women. When we have a man at home, it actually brings us down because we're having to care for them, usually like their children, you know? That was a very long tangent.
No, but it's true, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through that, and that is a nightmare. Oh, yeah, I mean, he would take care of like majority of the financial stuff, so I felt like I was like living lavish, but there was always something that I had to do in return, and one of those things was sex. He wanted me to have sex a certain amount of times. And the stuff that he was into, like, not to slut shame or anything, but it was like not fun. I'll just say it because I don't give a fuck. He was like always wanting to get a blow job, and I was like, dude, I got TMJ. It's called a job for a reason. Like,
Yeah.
I do. I have
There you go.
TMJ.
Your jaw just locks up.
No, literally, like, there was times where I'm like, I cannot do this. Like, and it was just not fun. It was so performative. It got to the point where we were scared. I was just so fed up. I would lay there like a dead fish, and it was not enjoyable for me. I have pelvic floor dysfunction, and I wouldn't say that it's necessarily because of this, but it definitely doesn't help because we've said this time and time again, if it's not a full body yes, it's a no.
It's
And
trauma.
exactly. So, I would lay there like a dead fish. I'd want to do it in the dark, and we'd have to schedule it because we both were working full time. I was also taking care of him, doing the laundry. I was feeding him, all that kind of stuff, because a man couldn't cook for shit. And then on top of that, my other job is is giving him fucking blowjobs all the time. And so that was a constant thing. And then I'm sorry, he was a porn addict. He was addicted to watching porn and stuff. So some of the stuff that he was into was just a little bit too extreme for me. And I just remember there were times where I'm like, I can't keep up. Like, I can't keep up sexually. Like, I'm so turned off by this man. And he brought to the table, well, we should open the relationship then. And then I should be able to be watching porn and stuff like that. But that would just like change his attitude. And there was just like so much stuff. And I wouldn't say, let me also say, I was not an angel in this relationship either. There was definitely points where especially after we moved into the house, where I was fed up and I am sorry, I hated this man. I could
Mhm.
not stand him. I just did. I was walking on eggshells all the time, and it was to the point where I just wanted to do anything I could to get by. But there were times where I would snap at him and stuff, and I'd be nasty back. Like I eventually started talking back or like not wanting to have sex, and I will be honest, I use sex as leverage to get what I want at times because I was trying to survive. But it just became so transactional, and like I've made jokes before that like, oh, I will never be that woman again, being a suburban housewife that's not actually a wife, scheduling sex at 9 p.m. in the dark, like not having fun, you know what I mean? But
So Nikki and I, we went out like October, we went out dancing and we were driving home and we just had this realization that we both were in our early 20s in the suburbs playing house with a man that we had to schedule sex with, and neither of us wanted to have sex with these men, right?
mhm.
And we were like, we're never fucking doing that again. And I always joke that people, like, I lived my life in reverse because I settled down very quickly. I was in the suburbs playing house with a man, doing the things that most people do, like in their 30s. And now I'm like, the idea of that makes me vomit. But we
Mhm.
were laughing. We were walking around my neighborhood. We got home. It was like 2, 3 in the morning, and we were laughing so hard about that. We were like, never, ever again are we going to be in the suburbs scheduling sex with a man that we don't want to have sex with. But getting back to that topic, I totally understand that, excuse me, like having sex with somebody that you don't want to because you're trying to just keep the peace in the relationship. You know what I mean? I would avoid, because I got to the point too where I hated this man. I resented him at a level that I can't even begin to comprehend. And I resented it. I did not respect him. If I don't respect you, there's no sexual attraction. Okay.
Mhm.
So I would do this thing where I would push off sex as long as I possibly could. And then I would realize like, okay, if I have sex like X amount of times, like this often, I could kind of keep the peace in the relationship. And that made my life easier because if he was unhappy, it was my problem, you know? And
Mhm.
so I would do the same thing too, where I would just be like, okay, I just need to get through this. And I would literally do that. I would be like, I would treat it like a chore and I would totally disassociate and I would have sex with somebody that I didn't want to have sex with. And I think about all of my sexual trauma. And a huge component of that is these relationships with men that I wasn't into. I did not feel safe with them emotionally, mentally. And so then proceeding to be intimate with them really, really was damaging. So that's a whole other layer of the safety that you lose in your body. And when it comes to your sexuality, when you are feeling like you need to engage with sex or have sex with these men to like keep the peace in the relationship. Because while I never experienced like physical violence or anything along those lines, I dealt with like I called it weaponized moodiness, where he would be in a bad mood and it was everybody else's problem and he would make your life hell. And so I was always trying to fix things and make his mood better. And yeah, just fucked up stuff. Fucked up stuff.
Yeah.
So Nikki and I are never doing that ever again. And if that's why you see us wild and into our 30s, it's because we already did that life and we realize it's not for us. And for me, I'm the same way. I'm like, I will be single for the rest of my life before I am back in the suburbs with a man that I don't like, scheduling sex because we have no physical intimacy or like, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But the thing is, they still wanted the sex, even though there was all the like, even though I felt like my partner knew I didn't want to be there, you know?
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, and he would make comments like that too, like, "I feel like you're not into it," and I'm like, "Why would I be into to
Yeah.
this?" Um, but yeah, and there was, like, also, like, external pressure too, I feel like that another thing that I think we should talk about, like, for younger women too, is, like, sometimes the impact that their family has can be the reason why a lot of people, like, will either stay in a relationship or,
Yeah.
you create this closeness with the family. There were times where his mom would check in with me about our sex life because he was telling her about our sex life, which completely inappropriate, and there's, like, we all have our opinions on that, but, yeah, there's just so many facets to that, um, relationship entirely.
Yeah, I think that's a super important note because for me, one of the reasons why I stayed, besides just being clinically depressed and feeling completely frozen in my life, was the fact that we had animals together. That was a big one. We kind of touched on that earlier, but I knew that before we had adopted Archie, I knew if we left, I would be giving Benny up, and that was like extremely hard for me to think about. But I was extremely close with his family. I still love his family to this day. His family was always very good to me, and yeah, it creates a complex layer,
Mhm,
right? Because you have, like, again, all of these things that are intertwined, and that's what you want when you're in a relationship, right? You want to be close with your family, you wanna have your
mhm,
lives very intertwined, but when you're in a position, when you're entering that relationship when you're really young and you don't have any of your identity established, it's also puts you in a vulnerable position because your identity becomes them.
mhm,
Because you don't have other things, you don't have any sense of self established yet, you know?
yeah,
So
down to
again,
the
like,
family.
yeah, not every age gap relationship is going to be as traumatic as the situations that we're sharing with you today. And I'm not saying every single older man that pursues a younger woman is a predator or anything, but I think you have to be extremely cautious and you need to be mindful of the fact of what situation am I in? Why would this person be pursuing me? Do I have my own things situated? Am I figuring out my own identity? Do I have like a good group of friends? Do I have hobbies? You know what I mean? Like things that kind of establish who you are. Do I have my own independence? Asking yourself those questions and proceeding with a lot of caution, you know?
Mhm, for sure.
So, because we are still like, it's been almost 2 years. It's crazy to think that it's been almost 2 years since our breakups, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a different lifetime, but also that's still a short amount of time.
Yeah. And then we spent the following summer like going out and being kind of crazy and wild, but we were just like free for the first time in a while.
Yeah, we
Getting
got to
perms.
be kids again, which is
Yeah.
really sad to say, but, like, it was a lot of fun, and, like, I mean, we had, like, different takes on the relationship. I didn't leave the relationship. You left the relationship, which kudos to you. I
Well, to be clear, I only left the relationship because something catastrophic happened. Like
Mhm,
I always say that if he had just cheated, I do not know. I think at that point I would have left because I think for a while, like I remember January of that year watching. There's a couple influencers that I followed on Instagram going through breakups, and I remember being like I was dreaming of it. You know what I mean? But
mhm,
I know that the universe was like, all right, bitch. I know this situation is no longer serving you, but I know it's going to require something catastrophic for you to leave.
mhm.
So it took him being accused of assaulting a 21-year-old female for me to leave. So like let's be very clear that it's not like I was like one day I was just like I'm strong enough, I'm leaving, you know. I just was like, okay, I may not have that much self-respect, but I have enough to say that I cannot stay in this relationship any longer, you know?
Yeah, yeah. For me, I knew that, like, he could have done anything, and he did do almost everything to me, and I still stayed because it was stability for me. And, like, I feel like I'm being a little bit hard on my past self, um, because there was obviously, like, other reasons why I stayed. I loved him, I loved his family, we had animals and stuff together, and I loved the version of him that I created in my head, but
Mhm.
it was so hard to leave, and the hardest thing for me is, like, when you start to, like, talk to people who have never really been in relationships, like, to this extent, they're
Hmm.
always like, "Well, why didn't you leave?" Well, let's talk
Yes.
about a statistic. I believe it takes people 7 times, if they're not unalived by that person, to leave a toxic relationship. How many times did it take me? Probably more than that, but, it's very hard. It is very hard.
Yeah, I think it's such a hard, like, that's such a hard thing because I still feel like I sometimes have those thought processes about other people. Like, I
Mhm.
have a like I have seen people in my life that are with people that I'm just like, why are you still with this person? But then it is so, like, I feel like every time I try and explain my life to people, people don't get it and they're like, "Well, why would you stay with him?" Right? And I feel like that's why we connected instantly, was because even though at that point we hadn't understood everything that was going on, it
There's
was
a
like the
silent
universe.
one.
Yeah, and the universe like put us on each other's paths for a reason, I think, to help support each other through that process. But it's really complex. Why don't you just leave? Well, for me, I would say, obviously I love this person and I had a deep I have struggled with codependency all of my life that comes from abandonment in my childhood, and like codependency is something I'm still working through to this day, right? I have a lot of codependent um natures.
Mhm.
And then we had shared pets together, but I think the biggest thing that prevented me from leaving was the depths of the depression I was experiencing staying in a relationship that I knew didn't serve me, right? I knew that relationship wasn't good for me. I was aware enough to understand that. I knew I wasn't happy, but I was so depressed. I became immobile. I became frozen. My depression, it kept me very, very stuck. So I think it's like, yeah, all these other components. I mean, for me, I didn't fear physical safety. I just I was stuck. I was so emotionally stuck because of my depression, you know? So
Mhm.
I don't think I really fully understood that until now I'm out of it. I can look back on that time period in my life and see how depressed I was? So,
Mhm.
and I just don't think it's ever useful to even ask those questions,
Yeah.
because then you're almost like blaming somebody who is surviving a very hard situation? It
Mhm.
should be, why did that man even pursue you to begin with? You know?
Mhm. Yeah. Or
Because,
why didn't he leave, or,
yeah, why did
why
he
aren't we
call it?
blaming him? Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know
So,
who I was outside of
mhm,
that relationship. I didn't my whole identity was him. So that was another reason why I couldn't leave. I knew I was depressed. I knew that my body was like saying something to me, but like I didn't have the tools and stuff to get me through to take the leap to be like, you deserve better. Maybe now, like maybe like the older I got, but like when I was with him, it was like my early 20s, like 20 to 24. I didn't even know what I wanted to do career-wise. I mean, I had my real estate license, but I had nothing to my name that wasn't tied to him.
yeah, and then I think it's super important to remember too, a lot of times we have these belief systems about ourselves and they're telling us to confirm it. You will be nothing without me. You won't make it on
Mhm.
your own, blah blah blah. And so you kind of believe it. You internalize it in a way. So for me too, it was always like, can I make it on my own?
Mhm.
I had never really done that because the time period between these two relationships was less than a year. So I think I wondered, could I make it on my own? You know?
Mhm.
And when you are in a very established life where you wake up and you go through a routine, like, you know that leaving is going to disrupt all of that. You're going to have to find somewhere to live. Can I afford to pay all the bills on my own? Like, it's a really, really big step. And I think a lot of times it's like just easier to be like, I'll deal with this later. Today, I don't want to deal with that change. I don't want to uproot my entire life today?
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
pushing off the inevitable all the time.
Mhm.
So,
But thank God we're out.
but we are out, and it's like it's been such a fun journey to watch us kind of both start to unravel things, and I think both of us are on this journey of coming home to ourselves, actually uncovering who we are, actually figuring out who we are. Because for me, I never explored who Lana was until I got out of that relationship. It was the greatest gift in the entire world, was going through that breakup, because I feel like that literally just placed me on this path of spiritual awakening, of healing, of coming into my own, of figuring out who Lana is, of just stepping into my fucking power. But yeah, I mean, it's been a trip to look back on it. It's been a trip to be like, holy shit, I was there. I did that. I lived that. I really did some crazy ass shit to survive.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
girly, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing.
I'm saying that, like, some of you may not understand this if you haven't had traumatic childhoods, if you haven't had like a background where you've really had to scrap your way out. But I think for those of us that have really just been surviving, and we've just really like, we spent a good chunk of our teenage years and then our 20s just surviving. It's like, I think you will listen to this and you will understand. And for those
Mhm.
of you that don't, it's totally okay. But I just know that there's so many women like us out there that are like, doing what we need to do to survive. And sometimes it comes with the cost of sleeping next to men that we don't trust and don't make us feel safe.
Mhm. That is
And
so true.
that's okay. You know, we forgive ourselves for that. But I
Mhm.
just want everybody to find healing
Mhm.
and
And
safety.
I would say that I've forgiven him for the most part too. I'm the type of person I'm not black or white either. I see way too many shades. But I also know that like there's accountability that needs to be taken on both parts as well. I know that I was probably not a good partner at times, but I will say reactive abuse is very very true. We've seen it in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case.
Mhm.
Um all those things, and something that you know it was hard for me to like find the forgiveness in my heart, because I went through the 7 stages plus of grief, because you grieve relationships no matter what anyone says, because that person is dead to you in a way, especially for no contact. But for him, I forgave him because one of the like last things he ever said to me, and it was the night that I was leaving the next day and he was going on a trip, and I was moving out of the house completely. He told me, "One day you will forgive me for everything that I've done, and you will look back and say, this was the best thing that ever happened to me." So he knew that he hurt me deeply and that he was abusive, because that just in a way omitted guilt. So I was able to take that and forgive him for who he is. That's not to say that there's moments in my time where I'm like, oh my God, if I didn't go through this, I would be in such a different place, blah, blah, blah. But like, I do forgive him.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial part of our healing journey, right? Because forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is about us. I experienced like, so it was July. It was the night before I was going to Greece, you guys. I was dancing around my little kitchen. My bags were packed. I'm like, I'm going to Greece by myself in the morning. And I had this realization that, because I was like, I'm going to go into my Greece trip with my heart wide open. And it was like 2 weeks prior that I had an experience with MDMA that just blasted my heart wide open in a way that I just hadn't experienced previously. Even with sitting with MDMA previously, it was just like the right circumstances, the right people, where I was like, my heart is literally wide open right now. And I was getting ready to go on this trip, and I was feeling very open to connecting with new people for the first time in a while, because I had taken like a year off of dating. I wasn't even engaging with men in any way. Like, I just had taken a year to just really invest in myself. And I was at that point after that experience where I was like, okay, I'm feeling like open. Like, I'm ready to connect with a man again. Like, I'm ready for physical touch in my life. I'm ready to just have I'm ready to connect with men again. And I was getting ready to go on that trip, and I was like, I'm open to anything that comes my way. But I just remember in that moment, I was standing in my kitchen and I was like, if I don't forgive him, that's a blockage in my heart, because I'm still holding on to the pain and the way that he hurt me in my heart. And for me to go through life with a heart wide open, truly, I have to forgive him. And it's not about him, because personally, don't have many nice things to say about him to this day. I don't have many nice things to say about him. I see him as a very wounded little boy that has done zero work on himself and taken zero accountability for his actions. I'm not saying he hasn't gone through hard shit, but it's our responsibility as adults to heal so we don't hurt other people. So I don't think it's a valid excuse. But in that moment, I was like, I have to forgive him for myself, for my future partners, for my future connections. And I physically felt like it just released. And I just like let him go. And ever since then, he doesn't, I mean, we're having this conversation right now, but other than that, he no longer even takes up any space in my brain and definitely no longer takes up any space in my heart. So yes, forgiveness is a super important piece of this journey. And forgiving ourselves too. I think like that's a really big part of been a really big part of my journey, because for a very long time I was so mad at myself for like ending up in those situations, for staying in those situations, for not leaving. And I think a big component is just learning to forgive yourself and understanding that you were doing the best you could with the tools that you had at that point in your life. And you may make different decisions now, but you weren't this person then, you know? So
Yeah, and society takes such a huge role in it too. Women are made to feel like we age so quickly, and we're wasting our 20s and all this stuff, but we need to have kids in our 20s so that our 30s are a breeze and blah blah blah. Or you can't have kids past your 30s, and like the reality is like you can start over and do things over whenever you fucking want. It doesn't matter how old you are. I'm pretty sure Martha Stewart was 50 years old when she started her career. She wasn't, I don't know anything about her relationships, and it has nothing really to do with what we're talking about, but like you can start over and you can get through the hard shit whenever. Doesn't matter.
absolutely. And if you're like, oh, well, I've already been with this person for 5 years, I've been with this person for 6 years, we've been married for 10 and we have 2 kids. I don't give a fuck. Okay. It's like, what is it? Like the sunk cost fallacy, where if we've invested X amount of money into in a business, even if it's not working for us, we feel like we have to keep investing because we've already invested X amount of money. With the same concept applies to relationships, where we're like, well, we've spent this amount of time with somebody. How could I rebuild? How could I start over? I'm now in my 30s. I want children, all these things. And I want to tell you something, sis, there's nothing worse than being partnered with the wrong man, being single, being alone, not having children. All of those things are so much better than being partnered with the wrong man, because it will literally destroy you. It'll destroy your health. It will suck the life out of you if you are partnered with the wrong person. So instead of thinking, well, now I'm in my 30s and I wanted to be married by this, like, give up your timelines and know that it is so much better to be on your own, to restart, to rebuild. I started over with nothing to my name, basically, not even 2 years ago. You can rebuild at any time. And it is so much better to go through the messiness of rebuilding than to stay with the wrong partner.
Yep. I
Like,
agree.
there's nothing, the most harmful decision or the biggest decision we make in our life is who we partner with. It impacts everything. So we have to be wise as hell when it comes to who we're partnering, and picky too, you know? So yeah. Anyways, well, thank you guys for sitting in this messy conversation with us. I don't know if we even got our point across, but more than anything, we just wanted to say, like, we've been through the thick of it more than anything. But for the young women out there listening, I wanted to start a conversation around some of the dangers that come with these older men coming in to swoop us off our feet when we are very young. You know, date someone your own age in your own area of life. And also, I didn't even talk about this earlier, but so I'm just going to talk about it briefly. Another thing that you lose when dating somebody older than that is your rush to grow up. You don't get to grow up in like the normal stages of life. Like at 20, dating somebody who's 31, I'm living a 31-year-old's life. I'm never getting to be a normal 21-year-old, 22-year-old, 23-year-old. So you also have some experiences robbed from you. So there's a lot that you lose. And
Yeah.
it just be careful as hell. So Nikki also hosts a podcast. So I'm going to give Nikki the floor to kind of plug everything that she's working on, where you can find her. We will list everything in the show notes too, so you don't have to worry about spelling things out. But yeah, let everybody know what you got going on.
Yeah, so I am the host of the Vulnerability Hangover podcast. We're on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. And hopefully Patreon soon. We'll see how that goes. But you can follow my personal page. It's nikki.dunkle, spelled Dunkle, but she's listing it in the show notes. And I can't wait to have you on my podcast. And I so am grateful that I got to meet you and that we got to do this episode together because it was a long time coming. We left a lot of juicy stuff out, but we'll put that behind a paywall.
And you know what, you guys, if you guys have other topics you want to hear from us, please write to me and let me know. But I'm like, I already know another episode we need to do. Nikki and I need to talk about. We need to talk about friendship breakups because we actually went through a friendship breakup, and I don't think friendship breakups are talked about enough either. I swear, every episode I'm like, this topic isn't talked about enough. But this is kind of the point of my podcast, is just to dive into all these messy components. So she's definitely going to be back on my podcast soon, or we can talk about this on your podcast, talk about friendship breakups. But if there's anything else you guys want to hear from us, please let me know, because I plan to have Nikki be like a reoccurring guest on my show. So
thank you,
Nikki, for sitting in this conversation with us today. And you guys, until next time, we'll chat soon.
Bye.